Subcommittee on Terrorism and Unconventional Threats and Capabilities will come to order. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome all of you and thank you for joining us today to discuss current Rotary wing requirements of the U.S. Special Operations Forces and to, in particular, address any capability shortfalls. This hearing also will provide additional details on the expansion of the Rotary wing capabilities as requested by SOCOM for fiscal year 2011. Let's just say that this hearing is probably a good news, bad news type of hearing in the sense that the department and SOCOM all recognize that Rotary wing shortfalls are critical for our Special Operations Forces. And the bad news, of course, is how far behind are we, what do we really need, and how are we going to get this done and implemented in the years to come. So currently our Special Operations Forces operate in more than 75 countries each and every day, countering terrorism, building partnership capacity in key areas, and improving security and stability for some of our key partnering nations. In fact, I just had the opportunity to be out in Asia and to see some of our forces out there and take a look at the type of work that they're doing. They're often in remote locations with limited infrastructure and reinforcements, and air assets provide that vital operational link and emergency link, actually, to make sure that mission success is there for our Special Operations Forces. Rotary wing assets in particular are key. They enable us to do special operations, and they're critical for counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere, where the terrain obviously is not really accessible unless we do have that type of capability. So the helicopters and the tilt-wing aircraft provide fire support, surveillance, insertion, extraction, and other combat support functions. And most critically, they serve as the logistical backbone for our Special Operating Forces and our other forces that we work together in moving critical supplies over rugged terrain to those remote areas. My top priority as Chairwoman of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Terrorism, Unconventional Threats and Capabilities is to ensure that we understand the types of resources that are needed by Special Operations Forces and to figure out how we're going to get them in place so that we can deter terrorist threats. And this includes our Rotary wing assets, which, of course, if you can imagine, are in high demand, and everybody wants them. Where are we going to get them? It's important to note that the U.S. Special Operations Command cannot buy aircraft, but is actually only authorized to pay for Special Operations Forces' unique equipment for aircraft. And that means that SOCOM must coordinate very closely with the services. So I look forward to discussing this process to make sure that, in fact, coordination is going on, and to hear how the services' larger acquisition program actually does support our special forces. And I hope that today's hearing will provide the necessary details on the expansion of Rotary wing capabilities for fiscal year 2011, and also for them to discuss future year requirements and solutions to address this issue of everybody wants it, but we don't have that much of it. So today we have two witnesses before us. First, we have Mr. Gary Reed, who's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Combating Terrorism, representing the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And we have the United States Army Colonel Vincent Reep, the Director of Rotary Lift Assessments at U.S. Special Operations Command. Once again, I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to hearing your testimonies. And I'll remind those here that we have this testimony in writing. It's already been provided. Hopefully those of us here have read it, and we'll ask the gentleman to lead off in a moment. But I'd like to indicate over here to Mr. Klein, who is stepping in for Mr. Miller of Florida. And Mr. Klein, do you have any comments to make?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to add my welcome to our witnesses and ask a unanimous consent that Mr. Miller's opening statement be entered into the record. And just say to our witnesses, of course, I spent a whole lifetime in Rotary Wing. My son is spending another lifetime in Rotary Wing, and so it is obviously very near and dear to my heart, and I want to express my my certainly sadness at the loss of AFSOC's V-22. We have pinned so much hopes on that tilt rotor technology, the Marine Corps certainly, and it's an absolutely fantastic asset. So I'm eager to see the results of that investigation. And we're probably going to talk about 47s and H-60s and things like that here today, but that was a tough loss. So I'm looking forward to the testimony, and I yield back.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Klein. And so we'll lead off. I'll remind our witnesses that your testimony will be inserted into the record and ask you to summarize in 5 minutes or less. We'll begin with Mr. Reed. How's that?
Thank you, Chairwoman Sanchez and Mr. Klein and other members of the committee for this opportunity to testify today on critical rotary wing shortfalls for the U.S. Special Operations Command and our Special Operations Forces. Like you, I share a keen interest in this, not only by virtue of my current job in Special Operations Oversight, but also in my military career. I spent 28 years as a Special Forces operator, both in our theater forces and in our classified forces, and I've lived this problem as a ground operator for my whole adult life, so I'm very keen to be a part of it now and make these recommendations and provide the oversight that I think we need to get this right and keep this getting better all the time. It is my pleasure to join Colonel Vincent Reap here today from U.S. SOCOM to discuss our programs, our plans, and our policies to support current and future Special Operations Forces rotary wing requirements. As you mentioned, Madam Chairwoman, I have provided written testimony, and I'll ask that it be entered into the record. And to follow on your point about providing just some key highlights here for a couple minutes, with your permission, I would like to say that this issue of rotary wing aviation, whether provided by helicopters or their 21st century tilt rotor fixed wing cousins, the Ospreys, has been the hallmark of U.S. military operations fully since the days of the Vietnam War, if not before. The extreme climate and high mountainous terrain in Afghanistan poses significant challenge to the use of rotary wing aviation and has generated significant interest by this committee, by our defense planners, and as well as those in the aviation industry, academia, and in our think tanks. The Department of Defense has been actively engaged in addressing these challenges since the onset of the war in Afghanistan, and most recently in our 2010 Quadrennial Defense Review, which we provided to this Congress in February of this year. We continue to adapt our forces and capabilities in this area to ensure we have the right assets in the right locations to meet the demands across the force. As we noted in the QDR, the sustained deployment of Special Operations Task Forces in Afghanistan, Iraq, the Trans-Sahel, Colombia, and the Philippines has outpaced SOCOM's current rotary wing assigned organic capacity. The QDR looked across the department to develop solutions within U.S. SOCOM and in our general purpose forces that would provide near and long-term relief to these shortages. As a result of the QDR process, and as otherwise reflected in the President's 2011 budget request, we're taking several steps to address this. We're expanding the number of MH-60 and MH-47 rotary wing lift platforms that are assigned to U.S. SOCOM. We're continuing to field the CV-22s. We're adding 2 additional combat aviation brigades to the U.S. Army and developing direct support agreements between Army and SOCOM to solidify this, what we call GPF, General Purpose Force, and SOF integration. And this is a theme, by the way, that exists not only in aviation, but across the body of enabling direct support type assets. ISR is another good example, intelligence resources in general, where the criticality of these enabling capabilities is such that we are improving and sharing across SOF and GPF more so than ever. We're also, as reflected in the QDR, dedicating 2 Navy helicopter squadrons to provide direct support to Navy special warfare. This, again, is a sign of the time, so to speak, a new construct, a new way to take what we have and make it more available to SOF in this case. And it's something that was happening less formally, and we're strengthening through these agreements as part of this sort of year-long process in the QDR to look at ways to get at this in the near term as well, while we build new platforms for the long term. And then similarly, extending the service life of those platforms that we have that we can do that with, and Colonel Reep will talk more about that. Increasing our number of pilots is another area where we have platforms. We need more pilots to get more out of the platforms we have. So these are the types of things that you see in the QDR, and these are the things we're doing to address this most currently. All of these measures will, over the 11 to 15 period, help close the gap that currently exists in soft rotary wing aviation. Broadly, our goal is to ensure that soft fighting today's counterinsurgency and counterterrorism operations have the vertical lift they need to succeed. And improving, as I said, improving SOF and GPF integration is critical to this goal. In addition to ensuring that we have sufficient rotary wing capacity for our own force planning, we also, in this discussion, must consider the current and future demand to train and equip foreign forces as part of our long-term strategy to strengthen the security force capabilities of key partners. And if you look within the National Defense Strategy, National Military Strategy, particular to this transnational terrorism fight, getting these safe havens, denying safe havens, and increasing security capacities of key partners is essential to achieving that goal. In that vein, aviation forms a key component of that. The QDR highlighted the priority of building partner nation security capacity as a mission for U.S. forces. And within SOF, this manifests itself most presently in the expansion of the Air Force U.S. AFSOC 6 Special Operations Squadron, which is still the only U.S. military unit specifically organized, trained, and equipped to train and advise foreign militaries on the operation and employment of air assets. Additionally, however, within our general purpose forces, both the Army and the Air Force are formalizing and expanding organizations in each service that also provide training to pilots. In the Army's case at Fort Rucker, the Air Force has expeditionary wings in Afghanistan that they are, through this process, adding to, expanding, and providing a basis for going forward. So all of this is related to this in one way or the other. The challenges related to medium and heavy vertical lift and hostile, direct, and austere environments are among the most pressing the Department of Defense faces today. The Army, the Air Force, and the U.S. Special Operations Command are moving in the right directions to mitigate these challenges. I thank you again for inviting me here today to address this. I look forward to your questions today, and most importantly, we do appreciate the continued interest and support by this committee for the Department of Defense, for our special operators, and as we go through and review the budget requests going forward, we appreciate the support the committee has provided in the past, and we hope to continue in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Reed. And now we'll hear from you, Colonel, for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. Good afternoon. Distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to appear before you today to highlight United States Special Operations Forces Rotary Wing programs. As the Director of Rotary Wing and Maritime Assessments for the United States Special Operations Command, it really is an honor to be here before you today to offer this testimony. By way of a brief introduction, please allow me to tell you that I've spent 24 years in Army aviation, to include 2 years on an exchange with the United States Marine Corps at MOTS 1 in MCAS, Yuma, Arizona. I've been a Army Special Operations aviator since my selection in 1993. I have served or commanded at every echelon in the 160th, from platoon leader, culminating in my service as Aviation Task Force Commander in combat in both Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as service as the Executive Officer and Regimental Deputy Commander. I've executed over 3,000 hours, more than 1,000 hours under night vision goggles, and have operated each of the 160th airframes, so I'm pretty familiar with the regiment and its capabilities. Presently, I do serve as the Assessment Director to the Commander of the United States Special Operations Command on rotary wing and maritime platforms, which are in my portfolio. Along with several other joint officers, we provide capability assessment and program evaluation that provides the best mix of joint capability for the command. We offer those recommendations to the commander as he makes his decisions to allocate resources and in accordance with the strategy. We'll offer that thanks to the foresight, advocacy, and strong support of this committee, we are indeed positioned to meet the nation's expectations of its special operations forces. I thank you for taking my statement for the record and admitting it as such. The United States Special Operations Command unique responsibilities include providing special operations forces with specialized equipment to perform their worldwide missions. Essential equipment to the command includes its vertical lift aircraft, assets which are capable of operating at extended ranges under adverse weather conditions to infill, exfil, resupply, and reinforce SOF. Owing to the realities of the multiple conflicts in exceptionally challenging environments, the value of vertical lift in support of SOF cannot be emphasized enough. Helicopters and tilt-rotor aircraft provide a unique and potent military capability, one which certainly spans all the services within the department. Despite their prominence and necessity, deployable SOF rotary wing assets remain limited. The improved survivability, equipment, advanced training, and extended ranges, however, the Special Mission Aviation fleet empower missions unattainable by any other. SOF force structure growth remains rapid and unprecedented. The time, however, required to manufacture and modify Special Operations Aviation airframes, as well as train the Special Ops pilots who will operate them, have created a bit of an imbalance in required lift for SOF. The FY 2011 defense budget request on the heels of the QDR, as mentioned by Mr. Reed, begin to address the reality, and they do request continued support for a program aimed at achieving the required capacity, certainly by the end of the future years defense plan. In tandem, Special Operations Command works closely with the services to mitigate rotary wing lift shortfalls. The General Purpose Forces Aviation and increased service support of helicopter operations in support of SOF combined to provide a critical enabling capability to our deployed soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen. Like the services, SOCOM does not normally exercise operational control over its deployed units. Employment and allocation of in-theater assets remain as directed by the Geographic Combatant Commander. I'd like to highlight that the SOCOM 2011 budget request includes three key aviation funding items. Approximately $80 million for rotary wing upgrades and sustainment, $108 million for the service life extension of the MH-47, and $179 million for the MH-60 Black Hawk modernization program. Additionally, replacements of aircraft lost in combat and training accidents are contained within the FY 2010 Overseas Contingency Operations Supplemental Request. The funding paves the way for ongoing survivability, reliability, and maintainability, and sustainment costs for the fielded rotary wing aircraft and subsystems. It does include procurement of 16 helicopters of MH-60 and the advanced procurement of 8 additional MH-47Gs. In closing, the budget request exists as a turning point for a longer-term upturn in the numbers of these valuable assets. Targeted upgrades will bring us the capability and capacity gains for both SOF and the geographic commanders that they serve. These are crucial stepping stones in reversing a capacity and capability gap toward one of increasing outcomes for our Special Operations aviators and our special operators. On behalf of the United States Special Operations Command, I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Colonel. I appreciate your testimony. And I'm going to begin by asking some questions, mostly because, as you know, I'm new to the subcommittee and new as its chairwoman. So I'm sort of trying to get my feet wet here and understanding. I've gone through your testimonies, have sat in on the QDR issues. And my first basic question is, it's my understanding that some assets are within SOF, but most assets are from conventional forces that are plussed up to SOF standards and then used to operate for SOF. Is that correct? Or explain to me what the lay of the land is with these assets.
I'd be pleased to do that for you, Madam. Madam Chairwoman, the SOCOM has an organic vertical lift capability. It is composed of a helicopter inventory and a tilt-rotor aircraft inventory. Within the helicopter inventory, there are a number of organic H-6, MH-60, and MH-47 helicopters. And on the tilt-rotor side, the CV-22, which are organic to SOCOM. They reside in the United States Army Special Operations Command and the United States Air Force Special Operations Command, respectively. That inventory is the rotary wing SOF inventory. When our SOF operators are deployed into the Geographic Combatant Commander's area of responsibility, so for example into Afghanistan, and within that theater Assets are allocated to them. The geographic combatant commander requests those of the force providers. They're introduced into theater, and then he marries and allocates air in support of those SOF operations within his area of responsibility to the theater commanders. In the case of SOF operators in Afghanistan, for example, where he has SOF operations on the ground, they may require not only special operations aviation support, and so he would put his MH-60s or 47s against those requirements, but they may also require just a more general rotary wing support in support of those SOF operations. And so he has the ability to array support or command relationships of other general purpose force, so more traditional CH-47 perhaps or UH-60 in support of those SOF operations.
Good. Okay. Gotcha. Mr. Reed, when you talked about your opening statement, we know that there are shortfalls, and especially for the future, and those have been well documented. I think before I came on as chairwoman a month or two ago, there had been, I think last March, a whole hearing on a review conducted by Joint Staff and RAND and the Center for Strategic and International Studies, all substantiating the shortfalls that would come before us with respect to rotary wing capacity for Special Operation Forces. And I know that the Assistant Secretary Vickers has recently commented that rotary wing lift is still one of the biggest hardware needs for SOF. So from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, can you tell us where you think the bottleneck is? Is it lack of money appropriated to it? Is it lack of manufacturing capacity? Is it that some of that necessity was the 22 and we had some ongoing problems with reliability of that aircraft? What are the shortfalls, and what's the root cause of that, and what can we as a Congress do to alleviate that?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chairwoman. And to get right to it, I think everything you mentioned bears on the problem in one way or another. I think there are some other factors that I guess you would say that got us into this situation. I would say the single greatest factor that got us where we are into a shortage is the general unpredictability of the security environment. And just to take that back to, say, a 2003-2004 time frame, and what we know now that has occurred over those 7 years between now and then, and what you run into is a period from 07 into this year where the demands in Iraq stayed high, went higher than anticipated, and then before that demand came down, we started raising demand and increasing supply into Afghanistan. And that point is about where we are right now. And I would say to this whole subject, in our view, we are on the way back up, but we recognize that we have been in this trough, so to speak. So I think in the first instance, hindsight being everything, the dual demand of both theaters of operation at a higher level than anticipated is probably a significant factor. The delay in fielding of the 22 certainly bears on the problem. The delays in getting the modifications and these things in place bears on the problem. The other thing that bears on the problem, I'm not sure if you mentioned or not, but we recognize, is that we have added ground capability within SOF. And within this QDR in particular, we focused much harder on the enabling capabilities than we did on so-called operator capability to try to bring those back to level. And as you look across the budget request in the QDR, I think you see that reflected in just about every part of the Special Operations Force. The emphasis is on enablers. There is some rounding out of operator growth, but not as significant as there was in 2005, 2006. And so we're matching now these two together. At the same time, this is all happening, we're continuing to adapt our methodologies in the field. And in some instances, the way our forces are arrayed or the demands on those forces or the missions or the enemy, for that matter, affects the demand in certain ways. And a good example of that is the growing IED threat in Afghanistan and the driver that creates for an increased demand on aviation. Now, to meet this again, what you can't go down and just buy some helicopters. So the simple mechanics of it all necessitate about a 4-year lead-in. So where we have looked hard and where the chairman looked hard in our review of helicopter assets, our ROHA review of 2009, which identified how all 5,317 helicopters in the Defense Department are being employed, and narrowed that down to where can we get helicopters that we can use in Afghanistan, which starts with the 47s, and then if you're in the South, the 60s and the 22s. And how can we best manage those? And this is where you see bringing in additional combat aviation brigades and laying those on top. Even before the troop increase, we were bringing in additional caps to address this. Integrating the SOF requirements into, as Colonel Reep said, into the combatant commanders' aviation demand supply planning matrix is a relatively new thing for us in SOF. In the past, SOF would have managed SOF. So these are being done not only because they make good resource sense, but because this is the only place to generate more capacity in the near term. So that's where I'd leave that. I think the environment, the enemy certainly has a vote in this. The delay of getting new platforms fielded once you get to this situation, and then the sort of fielding aspects that did create some delays there with the CV-22.
Colonel, would you have anything to add to that? I mean, I'm guessing that we're going to more remote areas. We're in 75 different countries with our SOF. And operationally, do you see any changes that require more of this rather than less?
Madam Chairwoman, thank you for the opportunity to add to Mr. Reed's comments. I certainly agree with Mr. Reed. The situation, specifically with regard to the environment in which we find ourselves currently engaged, the challenges that are present in Afghanistan accentuate the capacity gap, if you will, that there are few airframes in the DoD's inventory and then in the SOF inventory that can effectively operate at the extreme high altitudes and temperatures that are associated with operations in Afghanistan. So that it narrows the pool on what can get out there and get after and get a meaningful payload into the right location at the right time, to accomplish the mission. That said, beyond Afghanistan, as we look at what else is out there, what will we get after in the future, recognizing enduring requirements in those theaters for SOF and SOF Rotary Wing, it is a matter of building capacity as we have a program to do and a prioritization and allocation effort then that is done in coordination with the geographic combatant commanders and coordinated by SOCOM through the Global Sync Conference. I would add that. Thank you, Madam.
I see my time is expired. I'll ask Mr. Klein if he has any questions and give him 5 minutes for those.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll gleefully take my 5 minutes. Colonel Reep, I've always thought that the 160th probably had the finest rotor wing aviators in the world, and that was always tough for me to swallow, being a Marine aviator. But now that I see that you spent 2 years with MOTS, I'm sure you absolutely are one of the best in the world. It looks to me, the whole issue that we've got here is a shortfall. That's what we're talking about. You're looking for 16 more H-60s and 8 more 47s, is that right? And I'm leaving out the V-22. I'm just talking about SOAR right now. I'm actually surprised you don't need more of the Chinooks, considering the altitude requirements in Afghanistan. So we're looking for more helicopters, and we need money for that. And then you've got a request for about $100 million more, I think, this year in budget request in Rotary Wing for H-47 service life extension, H-60 soft modifications, and just general upgrades. And you've got money from the supplemental, which is going to go away pretty quickly. And so I've got a couple of questions. Do you see the money now in the budget that you need to add the aircraft and to replace aircraft, and the money for the modifications? And is all of that you're going to be able to take care of that as you go forward and put it in the baseline budget? So we'll talk dollars first, and if I have enough time, I'm going to talk people. Colonel Reed.
Thank you, Congressman Klein. You had mentioned the number of 47s in the inventory and whether or not that target that we had with adding the 8 that you saw in the FY11 budget request. Those 8, that request, sir, reflects the long lead items that are to get to the 8. I would offer at present, sir, this year we are continuing delivery of the MH-47G in its modernization and growth effort. So while today there are 54, that number ascends to 61 at the end of this year, and that it then continues a trend based on the QDR report, our work with the services, the FY11 budget request that adds 8 through that long lead item purchase and then deliveries in the across the FIDEP. As to the supplemental funding, sir, we working with the Secretary of Defense. SOCOM has articulated what we see in the near and through the program future as to the demands of SOF by the geographic combatant commanders. We don't see the requirement diminishing for SOF, and so we're working with the Secretary of Defense as to how we continue to be resourced in order to provide that capability that's being asked of SOCOM.
Right. Well, of course you are, but everybody does that. So, I mean, the question is, when the supplemental money goes away and we're just working in the budget, have you already accounted for that in the sort of fit up going forward? You've got the money reflected in there for what you need to modify and maintain all of these rotary wing aircraft that we just talked about,
yes,
inside the base budget.
That requirement is identified to OSD, and I'd defer to Mr. Reed to answer exactly how that would be resourced back to SOCOM.
If I could just add, the Secretary did make, and I don't have the number at the top of my head, I can get it for you, but a sub-to-base increase for SOCOM just this year.
Okay.
Carry forward in the program.
Okay,
that's what you're saying about getting off the supplemental.
Well, that's a general concern we have for everybody. You're soft sitting in front of us, but we could have the same conversation about all the services as we figure out how to wean from that supplemental and make sure that what we're going to require is actually in the base budget. And then very quickly, because my time is winding down rapidly, yes. 17 seconds left, unless the chairwoman was going to yield me some of her 5 extra minutes.
Go ahead.
For the force structure to support all of this, do you have the force structure, and are you manning at a high enough level now, or do you see any difficulties going forward to have the people that you need for the additional aircraft?
Thank you, Congressman Klein. As to get at your question as rapidly as possible and provide you some time.
Take as much time as you want now. I'm done.
Sir, today the regiment is able to man its operational fleet completely with trained and ready crews and execute in very close coordination with the services, specifically with the Army. Is working to continue to grow the number of special operations aviators that are necessary to fill and man all of the aircraft with trained and ready aircrew, and to do so at about a 1.5 crew ratio on our larger aircraft, the 60s and 47s. That challenge, sir, you recognize, and from years of experience, I know that you can appreciate it personally. I offer to you that there are some great initiatives that the Army has come back with in supporting SOCOM as we look to continue to grow that force and take it from where we are today to continue to grow it through 11 and 12 as our inventory year increases to make sure that we're meeting our numbers. So we've got a challenge to make sure that our institutional training base is manned appropriately and has the capacity to generate the throughput that's required, and at the same time have the right number of operational air crew to take those operational airframes and support soft downrange. It is a challenge I know that you can recognize, but one that in which we have a plan to achieve, and that our rate of growth, sir, that was an earlier comment that I failed to address, and regret that, but if you would, we'll let you know that we are pretty much working at the upper bound, if you will, of what Admiral Olson has been on record with this committee and talking about that 3 to 5% growth rate for SOCOM, and we're at the upper bound as we understand the importance and the demand for addressing this gap in capacity for soft rotary wing.
Well, you will, I know I'm over my time, but you will be having an impact on General Purpose Army as well, because you're taking the most experienced, the sort of the best of the best in many cases, and that's coming from the rest of the Army. So I'm concerned at both ends of it.
There is absolutely an impact there, sir.
Mr. Bright, for 5
Yes.
minutes.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I appreciate you holding this hearing, and I look forward to working with you on Special Operations Forces moving forward. I'm especially pleased to participate today because, as you know, I'm very interested in rotary wing issues due in large part to the fact that Fort Rucker, the home of Army Aviation, is located in my district in southeast Alabama, Ozark, Alabama. In Alabama, we love the sound of helicopters flying overhead because, as my constituents often say, that's the sound of freedom that we hear, not helicopters. Considering the important role these aircraft play in the Special Forces world, this hearing is very timely, and I'm also here to ask a couple of questions to the witnesses, and want to thank you for coming today and testifying, and you've already been very enlightening for me. Mr. Reed, my first question would be to you, and I heard you answering the chairlady's question, but I'm not sure I grasped the opinion or your answer firm enough, and I'm just going to kind of ask it maybe in a different way. Based on the shortfalls that we're having right now in the rotary wing lift forces out there, do I hear that it's having an effect on the ability for us or our country to deter, disrupt, or defeat terrorism throughout our global efforts out there? Did I hear you comment or give an opinion based on our shortfalls?
No, sir, not that I recall.
Okay, would you have an opinion as
I would
to what
love.
effect?
Yes, absolutely.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
I would say no. And the chairwoman mentioned her trip out to the Philippines, and what she saw out there is contract aviation. My point is, outside Iraq and Afghanistan, our employment model, our engagement model, and our options for deployment of Special Operations Forces in the counterterrorism fight context is largely dependent upon what the political security environment will bear. And in most cases, that will not bear an overt MH-47, MH-60 presence. This links back to my comment earlier about our aviation training for partners and what we call in the department our non-standard rotary wing capability and a suite of capabilities. For example, where we train partners in a foreign manufactured aircraft. We have, coincidentally, just relocated an Army regiment to Fort Rucker, and we will be expanding this at Fort Rucker. Was previously at Fort Bliss, specifically for the purpose of training U.S. pilots, military and some DEA in there as well, for foreign aircraft. Those aircraft become our way of working in some of these other countries where we cannot deploy a U.S. military aircraft. So that's part of this equation. Of course, globally, if we're looking at forced projection, forced entry type of military operations, certainly we have the capacity and we have enough assets to conduct a mission in another country should it be warranted. But I don't want to say that that's happening. It's a capability we reserve. If you look at our engagement in this global counterterrorism fight in other countries, it is largely through and with partners, and in most cases through and with their capabilities as well. So this particular shortage we're referring to that is most manifested in Afghanistan does not export into shortages in these other areas necessarily.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Colonel Reap, do you have anything to add to that?
Nothing substantively there, sir. I certainly agree with Mr. Reed's assessment of that. The U.S.-type aircraft in some countries and their overt presence may or may not send the right message, and so having that other capability, as he addressed, and building partnership capacity is valuable.
All right. I've got very limited time, but let me ask this. We've retired the MH-53, and in your opinion, Colonel, I'll start it with you. What effect, if anything, in retiring the MH-53 have on our rotary-lift shortfall, if anything at all?
There was certainly an impact, sir, qualitatively and quantitatively, assuredly, drawing down the vertical lift inventory. However, it was faced with obsolescence and the cost of maintaining.
Has the Osprey filled the void?
We saw that the 47 and the Osprey together would fill that void, and we are seeing that upturn as time and resources continue. We certainly would expect that as a result of FY11 and through the FIDEP that we more than make up for the loss of the 53.
Okay. Madam Chairman, my time's expired. I'll yield back to you.
I thank the gentleman from Alabama, and we'll do a second series of questions, so you'll have another opportunity to ask, and I'll go ahead and ask the question. Admiral Olson has suggested that about 80% of our Special Operations Forces are in Central Command's area of responsibility right now. Is that also true about our aviation assets? Does the ratio pretty much follow that? Either one of you?
Madam Chairwoman, thank you. Probably greater than of the deployed soft rotary wing assets. It's probably a greater percentage that is engaged in Afghanistan and Iraq. I could tell you that since 9/11, about 30% of the soft rotary wing inventory has been deployed, and another 10% on top of that has been on an alert posture with a very finite window for it to be recalled. So essentially committed out of the aggregate inventory on any one day.
Thank you.
If I could just add,
Yes, Mr.
all of the 47s, soft MH-47s that are deployed are in CENTCOM.
Thank you for that. You mentioned in your opening testimony and the 2010 QDR review highlighted the Navy recently converted 2 squadrons to support requirements for Navy SEALs. I think that's a step in the right direction, using existing squadrons to help support the SOF and to help close the gap that we're witnessing. Are there similar proposals being considered by the department, for example, Air National Guard units or Marine Corps aviation assets dedicated to support MARSOC or something, for example? Either one of you or both of you.
Just so I didn't mislead or be more precise about the Navy asset, this is a support arrangement. It's not a physical conversion of a platform. It's a formalization of a relationship that Navy Special Warfare already had with Navy to essentially borrow the 60s, whatever. It's not an MH. It's the maritime version. So it wasn't a conversion per se. The Army, as I mentioned, 2 additional combat aviation brigades in the QDR, which results in about 24, 25 MH-40s or CH-47s. It depends on, they tailor these for particular missions, but about that many 47s. Again, not converted for SOF, but through this process of formalizing these SOF GPF support relationships that will increase their availability. So happening there in the Army. Not happening as actively in the Marine Corps, although the MAGTAF and the MU, for instance, last year, the MU went out to Helmand Province, out to Garmsur, did a great job out there, the 2-4 MU. And those assets, when they were deployed, were made available for other forces as well. But there's no deliberate support relationship piece being developed comparable to what we've talked about with the other forces right now. The MARSOC, as you know, is adopted a 1.0, a one task force presence in Afghanistan with the Special Operations Task Force in RC West. They receive their airlift support from the Special Operations Task Force there, so they're integrated. Their requirements are built into that.
So what do you see as any of challenges when you have that relationship that you've, in fact, reiterated that you're formalizing more? Are there challenges? Are there ways things that need to be changed when we sort of upsurfed a little to do a particular mission?
I think it's something we get better at every time we do it. I don't think there's a particular hard challenge. The forces, again, from my days in Special Forces that weren't that long ago, but the soft GPF interaction on the battlefield is unlike it's ever been. There's not the strong walls between the forces, so they're very accustomed to working with one another. And you see this. You see in General McChrystal's Afghanistan strategy and his things he's doing out there with the command and control relationships, which have, some folks are a little not so sure. But what's good about this is the battle space owners, the maneuver brigade, the GPF, and their integration with the soft operating in their area is tighter than it's ever been. So it builds on this mutual reinforcing, mutually supporting relationship theme that pays dividends across the operation and across the force. So I don't think there's a particular hard challenge to it other than just learning how to operate in a way that maybe some folks have not operated in the past.
Colonel, you want to weigh in on that, or shall we move on to the next question?
Subject to your, if you have an additional question that you'd prefer that I
No,
address.
if you have something to add to what Mr. Reed just said.
I certainly would be able to cite several examples to assure you what Mr. Reed has told you is borne out in the realities of the support in the theaters, as well as specifically Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as to SOF at large. It is not uncommon where the General Purpose Force provides rotary wing support to SOF. This is consistent with the history, the relationship between SOF and the General Purpose Forces. I had an opportunity in command of a General Support Battalion in Honduras to support SOF while I was down there. As my air crews, flew missions in support of SOF. There are plenty of my peers, contemporaries who have commanded in Iraq who provided with their assault or general support aviation battalions out of the General Purpose Forces support of SOF in combat. One other thing that I would add with respect to the two H-60 squadrons out of the Navy, it builds upon a relationship where Navy helicopters, HSC, have been, continue to provide support to SOF in Iraq. Again, a GPF support to rotor wing SOF. And so the QDR report and the intent of the language codifies that, and having that naval GPF helicopter force continue to support SOF and by proximity focus on Naval Special Warfare Command.
Thank you, Colonel.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'll now recognize Mr. Klein if he should have some further questions for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A comment on picking up on what the chairwoman was asking about the General Purpose Forces support. I understand very well that that's a sort of a long-standing proposition, as Colonel Reep mentioned. I am a little bit concerned about a couple of aspects of that. One, as Colonel Reep knows, the General Purpose Forces aren't trained to the same level as 160, nor is their equipment the same as 160. And I have a great deal of confidence that in the theater they're working that out, so we're not tasking a General Purpose Black Hawk Battalion, for example, to do the same thing that an MH-60 aircraft and crew would do. But that trade-off between support for the General Purpose Forces and providing the sort of best of best for the soft mission, in some cases where you have a very heavy tasking of your rotor wing forces in general, could be a little bit problematic. And I think it's important that SOF have the force structure and the equipment that they need. I mean, I know we just don't have everything right now, but I am a little bit sensitive to that, the impact that it has on the General Purpose Forces itself, and making sure that a soft mission, some of which are pretty demanding, have got the best crews. And unfortunately, the General Purpose Black Hawks, for example, aren't the same as M60s. They simply don't have the same stuff. Let me talk for just a minute about the V-22. I was looking in here, and I saw the number, and I have to admit I can't find it, about what the programmed number of V-22s is right now for AFSOC. Do you know, Mr. Reed, how many at the end of the day here they're supposed to end up with? CV-22s?
50, sir, I'm told. It's in here as well. I'm looking.
Yeah, well, let's bring it.
Maybe better answer than I.
Well, ever who might know, I don't know, maybe Colonel Reed, do you know, is it 50 at the end of the day?
50 is the number.
And how fast are we supposed to be getting that? What's the
The rate's about 5 per year, sir. We've already received delivery of some 11 airframes.
Right.
In fact, the 12th, however, we just lost one,
right.
so we have 11 on hand at present.
Okay. And so that's pretty much the delivery schedule you've been anticipating all along. We haven't slipped behind or sped it up that you know of in the last 2 years. Has there been an adjustment in that delivery schedule that you know of?
It's my recollection that we have pulled forward that delivery rate to the best of the ability of the manufacturer and in accordance with the department's priorities, and I defer back.
And how many of the payloads, how many of the 53s were there that these are fundamentally replacing? Do we remember that number?
I don't.
Okay, I'm just. Are we going to have more?
Take that one for the record.
Yeah, please do. I could look it up, but I can't find it here in the paper. And what I'm trying to get at is, are we going to end up? Obviously, the V-22 has much greater range and speed and so forth. But what's our capability going to be like at the end of this process compared to what it was under the old 53 program? And I guess without the numbers, I can't really tell. I mean, I know they're different lift capacity and so forth, but just sort of in terms of air crew and size of AFSOC.
So I would if the question is specifically 53 to CV-22 comparison, or are you open to the kind of at large, what?
Well, I'm specifically looking at AFSOC more than the total Special Operations Command, but the Air Force piece of this.
I think we'd have to accept that question for the record for you,
Okay.
sir, to make sure that we give you the specific number on the 53 inventory and allow you to draw that kind of a better comparison.
Yeah,
for
okay,
what it
that's
was
fine.
versus what will be.
That'll be fine. If we could just have that for the record, and I'll yield back.
Klein. We'll now ask Mr. Bright if he has any questions.
Sure. Hopefully I can clarify that. In the material that we were given today, it appears that 59 CV-22s have been ordered. Could that be correct?
The total, no, 50 will be the total.
50 is the total.
We have
Okay.
11.
Well, maybe I interpreted the data wrong. Just a couple of questions, if you would. I believe, Mr. Reed, as you know, the Air Force is looking at acquiring a small aircraft to support counterinsurgency-like operations. I know that most of these discussions are centered around fixed-wing aircraft, but are OSD and SOCOM involved in these discussions, and would such an aircraft help solve peacetime and wartime missions, in your opinion?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
Are
Well,
involved, would help. Won't replace. You can't do with a light fixed wing what you can do with an MH-47 for a night high mountain infill.
Yeah.
But where we can use other assets to take strain off the higher demand platforms, we certainly do that now, and we would be more able to do it if there were more to choose from.
Do you ever see in the near future a place for or a role for unmanned rotary wing aircraft in the near future for the operations here?
Yes, I do. I do see application for that, and I think there's
How soon in the
testing that
future?
proves that capability is viable for certain types of operations.
Okay. All right, well, good. Madam Chairman, I'll yield back. That's my questions.
Great. Well, see no other members arrive, and I'm sorry, it's a very, very busy time in Congress, but we're interested in the subject and obviously the capabilities of our special operating forces. We probably have some more questions for you, and we'll be submitting them for the record, and we would ask that, yes.
Madam Chairman, I have one follow-up question that's really stems from a conversation I had with my colleague who was here a few minutes ago.
Absolutely. Go
Left.
right ahead, Mr. Bright.
And this probably goes to Colonel Reed. He was visiting Walter Reed the other day and had a discussion with a wounded soldier there. And the soldier had some feedback, and I would like to get your expert opinion on what, if anything, we need to do with this problem. He was indicating that of course, the CV-22 is a very valuable tool in our efforts out there, but there was a problem rappelling out of the aircraft, and that it had such a strong propeller wind, for a lack of a better description, that it took 3 soldiers to tether the Osprey. And that seemed to be a very big concern of his. I know it's a soldier out there that has a concern who is wounded. But is there a problem with that? If you've got 3 soldiers tethering the Osprey, that pretty much opens them up for exposure and possibly fire without defense. Has there been a noted problem with that, Colonel?
Mr. Bright, appreciate the opportunity to answer that question for you. I am not privy to a specific fast rope insertion or rappel insertion issue to the CV-22. Of course, I do understand that the downwash velocity is significantly higher than a comparable helicopter, if you will, same type weight, max gross weight. And so having that downwash may, have some aerodynamic issues with the stability of the fast rope or the rappel rope, but I'm not privy to a specific instance that said that it would require a tethering process.
Would there be a way that you could look into that, see if there is a problem?
Absolutely,
or there has
sir.
been problems in the past, and let us know?
Absolutely, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Accept that for the record.
Madam Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bright, and I was privy to that information also from our colleague who said that the soldier basically said, I'd prefer a slower aircraft rather than to have to sit there dangling with 3 people at the bottom of the line to secure me down. So we might look and see if that is happening more than once.
If I may, I heard the same. I have not witnessed this. It seems very logical to me that the downwash, and this was really, I think, fast roping. I don't know that we're even rappelling. A little bit different. But the way that we're rigging these to drop the rope out with the wash that's created, it pushes the rope out to the side, and you're supposed to slide down like a fire pole. But I would say that this is a problem that I'm sure if we decide we need to continue fast roping out of CV-22s, we'll figure out, much like we figured out how to do things out of 53s and 47s. It's new. It wasn't a cornerstone of the fielding of the 22 that we would use it for a rope platform, but you don't have to have a piece of gear around a soft guy very long before someone's trying something different. So I think in the innovation and adaptation realm, we will find a way around this if we choose to keep doing it. It's unfortunate that the gentleman had a bad experience, but I would imagine it's something that someone's out there figuring out a better way to do it, and we'll overcome this. I think it's just a newness factor more than anything else.
Great. We'll plot that as one of the correlation points to see if it is a problem. Mr. Klein, do you have any further comments?
Just thanks again to the witnesses.
Then I thank the witnesses for being before us. As you know, we'll have some questions probably in written form coming forward from the rest of the members and maybe from the current members before you. We'd ask that you answer them quickly. And with that, the subcommittee hearing is over. And we are adjourned.